So my name is Sean Jamal Webster Williams, but I go by Jamal Williams, and I'll be your host
So I'll
for
be
the foreseeable
talking about
future.
how the psychoanalytic release effect is basically the effect that encompasses all experiences in this therapist culture. The best way for me to explain the catharsis release effect is with the observer effect, the controversy of the observer effect, suggesting, or the observer bias, that suggests that the observer or the measurement device necessarily changes the results that are perceived. This isn't necessarily true. Observer effect, which is a form of psychoanalytic release, and so the observer effect suggests and goes against current quantum interpretations of nature, and says that the observer is able to change the results merely by observation. And so what led us to this interpretation was the catharsis of therapy that was provided to us from hypnosis. And so you could say that people are caught up in an hypnotic suggestion when they believe an observer bias has a significant existence, because there's no way in which nature, independent from our understanding, can provide a effect that we aren't able to interpret. And so, that's basically it. So the psychoanalytic release effect can be seen as a phenomena that engulfs all experiences, just like how some people see their observation, like they are observing everything. This is an assumption, and this is the basis for their interpretations, because they see it, which is false. This is a false interpretation based on being caught in hypnosis, being caught in an attraction towards hypnosis rather than therapy in your experience, not the literal job or branding or therapy, merely accepting that experiences provide a therapeutic aspect, a healing aspect, if you wish, and so your observation is a form of release. By releasing, by observing something, you are releasing your interpretation, receiving back a release from the environment of opinions or affects of your interpretation. And so you can see all of the experiences that have gone on so far, and in this way, between a person and their environment, is a psychoanalytic release effect. And so even refusing to observe, refusing to interact in some sort of way, is releasing an interpretation, releasing the suggestion that will in turn cause an effect, a release effect from whomever, from your environment, continuing on, in a sense, further supporting this idea that Freud suggested, that catharsis or release is that which is the means to which we communicate. So you can see with thorough interpretation of what has happened in the community over the past 200 years that with the technological advancements in the public, that this is due to Sigmund Freud's release, his work on psychoanalysis, his feat, his legacy of him subjecting the term psychoanalysis, providing us with psychology and psychiatry, which are less so significant in this case, have provided us and the community with the means to develop theories like special relativity and quantum theory based on supported by the interpretations provided to us by psychoanalysis, which has led me to reforming the development of the elementary particles of the fundamental interpretations of our reality, which currently use particles which are developing from the plum pudding model of of an atom. Humor from the Greeks turned into the plum pudding model with electrons within a plum pudding turned into a nucleus of atoms, much smaller plum puddings with space in between, interacting supposedly electromagnetically. Their inability to interpret their innovations and experiments through psychoanalysis has led them to rely on limitation, this appearance of limitation, which is characterized by the plum pudding model, a physical object as providing limitations innately. Obviously, this is just because of the machinery we use, and because of the development, we haven't had a need to develop outside of our limitations. We've had a need to find our limitations and the nature of our limitations, but seeming as we have established a standard model, I've been looking at this since out for quite a few years, just looking at it, looking at how it's been developing. So I will be further developing upon the plum pudding model. To simply put it, I'm removing the plum pudding nature. So it's no longer a sphere or a circle. It's no longer an object that is fundamental to our existence. It is the description. It's a description. It's an interpretation of what can be seen as fundamental, what can be interpreted as fundamental or elementary, easy to grasp or understand, using the theories of mind also provided to us by Freud, which were easy to understand, even though they're not being used as the current popularized or most beneficial theory of mind, with the ego and the superego and the id as the identifying mind, where the superego is a moralistic portion of our behavior, the moralistic feeling provided to us by the ego, which manages our behavior through identification with morals. And so, to provide some psychoanalytic release in order to relate the current standard model to the fundamental model that I've been developing, that I've provided the first image to, the rest of the images to. I'll just start with the top, the up quark. So this was the person who came up with the theory of quarks. Somewhat inspired by the Buddhist Eightfold Path. It led to the development of the eightfold way in physics, which shows the relations of the particles quarks make up, so quarks themselves. And you can, because the up quark is like familiar in our body, it's in protons, it's in the atoms and nucleus in our body that we're usually familiar with manipulating, experiencing. I feel like it is appropriate to relate it to the Buddhist Eightfold Path. So because it is the slightly positively charged quark, it is effort. It's like the right effort in the Buddhist Eightfold Path. It's like effort. It represents or reflects the effort that is fundamental in our experience. And the down quark, its partner, reflects the balance. So it's down. It's like how two down quarks and a neutron, it neutralizes, it balances. It's the resolve. It's like the right resolve in Buddhism. So it reflects the balance that's fundamental in our experience. The charm quark, which in its discovery there was a delay. It lasted longer than they expected, but a minuscule amount of time. But even so, this reflects the delay that is fundamental in our experience, shown in their discovery. Furthermore, one of the experiments used beryllium in the discovery of this. They thought it was sweet, so they found that it was toxic. That's again, it's a delay. So it reflects the delay that's fundamental in our experience. So with the strange quark, in their discovery, there were lots of considerations about the process that they were using, whether or not it would lead to a doomsday scenario, as I quote, somewhat a cliche, a signature of the science community, the analysis, the mindset of the people there. It reflected that very potently, very profoundly, in my opinion. The signature that the strange quark reflects fundamentally, the idea was that a chain reaction would occur and change all particles into this strange nature. Similar to how this does occur. You see your signature everywhere. You see the signature of the architect, or just your interpretation of that. This is also fundamental in our experience, the signature. And with the top quark, which, as it was discovered, there were many scientists suggesting that they should call it, or they were calling it, the truth quark, which I appreciate. So I will continue this somewhat arbitrary suggestion. It, unlike all the other quarks, because of its large mass, cannot form any other particles. It cannot form a larger type of atom. And so it's by itself, when it's discovered, in a sense, it's that, like, truth is stands alone. The truth that's reflected in our experience fundamentally by the top quark. At the time, the bottom quark was also called the beauty quark. And seeing in the discovery, the scientists had an appeal to bad puns, as they say, as they describe it, showing to me a good example, a perfect example of the beauty of the psychoanalysis providing means for them to fulfill their intentions in any way that they wish, reflecting the beauty that is fundamental in our reality, the bottom quark. So with the familiar electron, it was discovered quite some time ago. The scientists were still looking at something they called the ether. Upon discovering the electron, this was let go of. We were downloaded. It's a download. It reflects a download. What else is electricity used for? Even so, it is the electron, not electricity, that provides what we attribute to electricity. That's what was discovered as the electron became understood. So it reflects the download, this sense of something that has been downloaded, or has been a download in our experience. The muon was discovered as a array of particles that seem to penetrate and just go through any type of material in a way that no one could understand. Penetrate is a penetrating power. It's like it's mining. It is mine. It's mu. It's the Greek letter mi. It's like that. So it's like mine. This type of me or mineness that is penetrating. That is mining. Is boring. It reflects that nature. Even seeing in the discovery where it's used to look for atomic material in places that they could not with any other type of particle. To mine through without any effect, without any side effects. It's just mine, the muon. So then we have the tau lepton, the tau. As it was being discovered, there was a few difficulties finding the right method of producing them effectively, producing a high amount of them. It's at a specific point, a specific energy. Too much produces too little produces too little. It's the toughness, of the habitable zone. These types of ideas expressed in science. Even so, the word tau is an alternative to pi. It provides an more easily understandable interpretation of circles, but it's tough because we don't use it. It represents the toughness. It reflects the toughness that is fundamental in each experience, in our experience. So now we have the electron neutrino, the partner to the electron in some sense, the download. The complementary to it is a danger, in the sense that you don't download the danger. It was discovered using nuclear explosions, somewhat a dangerous thing. They were still very enthusiastic by any means, regardless of what dangers or what other financial detriments may be presented. They were infused to find out what these neutrinos are. I'm even calling them poltergeist, somewhat ironically, jokingly, reflects the nature of a danger, the danger that is fundamental in our experience. Being a danger, seeing a danger, not dangerous, it's a danger. The electron neutrino. The muon neutrino. In the prize given, the Nobel Prize, as they usually win for it, they considered neutrinos lazy and somewhat suspect. They take away energy when they interact. Like suspecting someone, obviously, they have, similar to the muon, the ability to penetrate and go on for ages, just like when you are suspect of someone, taking away their energy. Similarly, there was some controversy at CERN. Some people believed the neutrinos were going faster than the speed of light, somewhat suspect, again, showing the fundamental, this ability to suspect, this fact of being suspect, reflected by the mirror neutrino. The tau neutrino partner with the tough tau, found with the tau through emulsion, through butter, oil, emulsion. It left a track, the tau did, and so you could see the tau neutrino as the emulsion, the lack of the track, the product of the track in the emulsion, the oil, the oiling, the buttery feeling, the buttering, the smoothness of an oil, the smoothness of an experience, the oil of an experience that is, it happens to be fundamental. This sense that things are being oiled, friction is being reduced, the toughness has a complement tau, the oil, the tau neutrino. So with the gluon, this is the part that holds all the quarks together, all of that quark goodness. So the gluon holding all the quarks together. When it was discovered, they're always wondering if they were ever found with each other. I was thinking it's like the outcasts, the gluon. They're not found together, because that's not an outcast. They're found with other things. The outcast. Similarly, they were looking at something called Bremsstrahlung. The gluon, hard gluon, Bremsstrahlung, was part of their discovery. The outpouring, somewhat an outlier of a consideration, outcasting of molecules, of particles attributed to the existence of a gluon, the outcast. So with the somewhat familiar photon, it can be seen as the grant, as it's the electromagnetic field itself. It is a particle form of the electromagnetic field, the photon. It grants, even you can see with the photoelectric effect, the type of photon determines the type of color produced, or the type of electrons released. It grants electrons its nature, because it is the electromagnetic field. The photon, it grants, it reflects this granting that is fundamental in our experience. The charged W boson and the uncharged Z boson, they're usually conventionally mentioned together. The Wikipedia article has them together. It's like the joy is charged with the W boson. The W is joy. It changes the flavor of quarks. It goes from up to down. Just that free movement of joy. With the issue in the Z, these are communicators, the W and the Z bosons. They're seen as communicators, gauge bosons, they gauge it. So they do interact between these are how the quarks and the leptons the other groups interact between these communicators. This is what is needed in between them, the issue and of the Z boson, uncharged, somewhat hard to find, but it was a great feat. It was an issue. It issued them the chance to look and complete their model with the Higgs, and so if there was also a joy with this finding the W charge between the quarks, how they interact, what is the strength. I mean, it is fundamentally showing us that issue with the Z boson and joy with the W boson is in our experience. With the Higgs boson, just seeing the capacity that we all have as a community, people calling it the God particle, mistaking it for giving all particles mass as its nature, but no, it's more of a capacity that's being presented to us. It's interesting. It's the only scale boson. It's the only type, subtype of its kind. The Higgs boson is presenting to us a type of gave us insight to the hierarchy and its problems. The hierarchy problem, its mass, and it provides, because of its mass, it does not completely agree with what we are seeing, even though we're able to detect it. The Higgs boson shows us our capacity, not so much in a containing type of way, like the capacity that we contain, more energetic quality, the capacity of our energy, fundamentally, Higgs boson. So these are psychoanalytic overlays that I've released. I've shown you basically how these relate to the 17 lines of the theories of mind that I used to recreate the fundamental model of what is of our experience. So as I was making this, I was also just trying to process further this theory of mind. So I've created 34 more imitations, alternative theories of mind, just based on things in my experience that I have associated in the same way. And so basically the first one acts as the ego, the second one the super ego, the third one the id. To explain this a bit more simply, it's basically your experience with handling, managing, or coping with the first, which is the ego, the first, is motivated by your understanding of the second, which is the super ego, the morals, the second, and expressed as your identification with the third, which is the id identification, the third. So your experience with handling, managing, or coping with the first is motivated by your understanding of the second and expressed as your identification with the third. So biology, technology, plastics. So your experience with handling, managing, or coping with biology, your biology, the subject of biology, is motivated by your understanding of technology, so let's put it simply there, and expressed as your identification with plastics. We use plastic products. Plastics, it's like malleable substances. So it's just the same with that, with everything else. So to explain simply how I made these fundamental descriptions, I took the non-dual term. I took one of the columns of terms, non-dual or dual, like emotional mastery, and thought, like the image says, invert this term. So what is the opposite? What's the inversion of emotional mastery? I thought creating effects. That is the furthest thing I could possibly consider in two words as the opposite of emotional mastery. That's still the first one. That's still in line in that sense. And so then I had creating effects and emotional mastery. I'm no longer inverting. There's nowhere to be seen, and it's transformation in a sense. I take so what's the middle ground I was considering between creating effects and emotional mastery? I found validation effects, and so I had 3 now. The middle ground to that was that I was considering. So when I had 4, I found the middle ground to that. 5, the middle ground to that. So that's basically how I constructed the side columns. So after I established the side columns, I had 2 phrases, and in between I paraphrased them. I created a sentence out of them, so somewhat at the beginning, using a few words to describe the to a few words to paraphrase just what I was saying. See here, validation effect: to allow the goodness you cannot fully perceive. At the beginning, it's like to allow the goodness. It's like I'm validating. Yeah, the effect I am intending to produce is validation. To allow the goodness you perceive. It's similar. I get the similar. I see that it's paraphrased, and so I've done that just to create a phrase, and at the end, obedience emote. So it's like, by those you don't expect to fully understand. It's like you don't understand them. So I guess if you're around them, you're obedient to them. You can't make them obedient. You emote obediently because you don't understand. So it's a paraphrase. It's just a paraphrase. It's no matter what it may seem to be suggesting, it's merely a paraphrase. And so after I had that, it's like each column is a somewhat reflecting the theory of mind, where the middle is the ego, but either side, the non-dual and the dual side, can be the super ego or the id. And so there's flexibility there, but the middle is the egoic type of suggestion, and so after I had that, I made 17 of those, and then I had the side parts, like inverting or transform, and then I either do the side parts first, and then I just add a little bracket on the side just to use a word, just to make it clearer. Somewhat again a paraphrase. It's a paraphrase in one word, the suggestion. So validation effect is like approval, simply put. And so then I create side parts for the top 3. There's no contrast in. It's just reflecting, in a sense, the freedom that we have. And so then after that, the next 14 show, and it can be interpreted as somewhat an expansion of the freedom, a continuation of the freedom, a development upon the freedom that we have, where this development it's necessary for, it can be seen at there's a contrasting side parts that I intended to put in. So then I put in 6, then another 6, because it's double 3 twice, and it's just 2 at the end, but it was connected to 3, but there's a mix at the bottom as well, but it's just 2, obviously, to make 17 for the 17 elementary particles. And so yeah, it's just another type of a summary, a paraphrase of the whatever number of lines, theories of mind are there, are considered there. And after that, I'm usually motivated to either make the heading, the top line, subheading, the next line, and then there's a very simplified description of what is fundamental in that experience, like up and down, left and right, positive and negative, approval, disapproval, accelerate, decelerate, and shoot and save, like in sports. So it's like it's all just considering fundamentally and trying to create a description that doesn't rely on limitation per se. The limitation is exposed as something that's a physical quality. Kind of encapsulate it some more. The suggestion of what is fundamental again. So just like face and body, air and earth, like the elements, like the humour. Then so I mean, I got, as I was making them, I got basically the first four. I made the first four up until like the elements. I just thought to get the elements in. After I got face and body, the first one was just like, I didn't even really think about making it short and sweet. So then I decided to go to it like in verse. It's face and body, and then after I got all the elements done, I was thinking like, what is similar to like saying earth and air, like because because earth like kind of balances with air, and like fire with water. Obviously fire can overwhelm water, or water can put out fire, kind of like that type of idea. Same with earth and air. There's like creed and need, and so obviously like your need is produced from your creed. The tools you produce are produced from your rules. More of them, yeah, it's just, I mean, more rules is that your creed is always making more rules, your need is always needing more tools basically. And so then after that I got 5, and then decided to take a break, show some people, talk about it. And I thought, what is similar again? So I came up with like phone and impression. So phone is like this as an object, home as a similar type of object, somewhere where you feel like you're at home. A highlight, somewhere where you feel, somewhere where there is significance in the object, and the impression. It could be kind of in a sense seen as like a subjective type of thing, when in the sense is the idea, the impact. Like it is not the object itself, but it is, like I said, it's how you feel about the object. So there's a like kind of a more confident and more significant reality than the object itself. No, I mean there isn't, because there isn't a more significant reality than the object itself. There must be the less significant one, in a sense, is the more conflicted. So that's the phone and impression. Like I said, the basis for setting up the ego type of middle sentences is paraphrasing, like I said. As I was making it, as I made the third one, as you can see, I decided to start the sentence with like to allow and to approach, like alternating, somewhat like a duet, that type of idea, because that's what I was doing, two against two things playing with each other. And then the next one, at this time, my parents gave me a letter for just containing something, something that they feel like something close to their heart, So I used that. So obviously I was just paraphrasing, but I was using like the sense that they would get given to me, like the ideas, the impression that they were suggesting to me, to kind of just mix in with the suggestions. That's why it's like first person. It's like I will. It's like they. It's like it's what I promised to them, what they promised to me. Like my reaction, their reaction. It was a letter kind of that I was looking at, and it was about 17 lines. Maybe there was about 20, but obviously I just used different lines. But then after that, obviously, I did not have anything else to do it with, and so I went back to just paraphrasing, because I had experience doing it, so I just done it again and I tried to do the sentences just a bit more different, still paraphrasing. And so as I got to the last image with the sigh, hence life, and the phone impression, I was in the process of telling some of my friends So there were 6 of us, so I thought, the 6 of us, let's just make the 6th one. That's what I was telling them. And so basically I used the words from the group chat, the messages from the group chat, to help me paraphrase, help me add something to the paraphrasing. So from when I showed them the images to kind of the last type of question I asked them about it, even though we were talking about just whatever in between, just from there. So I had about a couple hundred messages, a few hundred messages. So then I used just maybe 14 or 20 words, it's 14 or 20 messages, and it's took words from there to put in the paraphrase, instead of thinking of words myself in a sense. And then I made 17 of them, and after that I had all words. It's just it's a bunch of stuff, words from the group chat. And then I decided to add in the word phone, something like phone, the sound of phone, phony or phonetic. I added it in a few times, once or twice or more, to kind of in a sense make the subject of the egoic paraphrasing the phone, this phone type of idea. Then I was done with the phone impression. After I made all the side stuff. So what I've done is not so much a tribute to Sigmund Freud and one of Da Vinci, just a little bit of Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. It's more of a paraphrase of all of his books, just his books. So listened through them, took some passages that I thought I could utilize psychoanalytically in life, that I thought were cool. So I have the call to arms. So formalities and traditions appeal to the order of the hospital through positive transference. So let me start here. Formalities and traditions appeal to the order of the hospital through positive transference, or psychoanalytic catharsis, which is release, allowing business to run smoothly. So that's how I see it. This is a bit of history. The 17th Earl of Oxford propagandized the British monarchy through Shakespeare. That's apparently who it was. Secrecy. And he loved to make poetry, loving poetry. So psychoanalysis communicates the content of a system or a person. A recognition or respect of academia supports scientifically verified information, but has no way of creating content, and is influential in all communities because academic accomplishments require successful clinical applications rather than its content being valuable in any type of way. We can lose faith in knowing what is good for ourselves. A symptom of this are troubles in life, existential crisis. To compensate, our past and future becomes inaccessible or misunderstood. The desire to be responsible, or a belief that someone is irresponsible, could be you, represents the character that is communicated to close friends and family, acquaintances, partners, through your behavior and mannerisms. Similarly, to want to change your personal situation through trickery, manipulation, verbal communication, just talking, reduces this dependency, so you can't see it, reduces any dependency on others. So psychoanalysis is by no means a school of thought or a way of thinking. Instead, a person's attempts to understand their own humanity is analysed, and their ability to interpret this, their attempts to understand their humanity, as more important than their present environment, whether it's apparent, provides psychoanalysis as the rationale for past experience to be represented intimately in present circumstances, just like how your thoughts are intimately represented in your surroundings. You know, you think about life while it surrounds you. On the contrary, psychoanalysis, your understanding of this is that which is intimately represented, overlaying your surroundings. This is your thoughts. These are your thoughts about it. Since I was doing that, let's see if I'm still recording. Yeah. So, people reject psychoanalysis by not using the name, potentially resulting to its descendant, psychology, unwittingly gatekeeping their understanding of the subject and how it influences behaviour. However, this does not affect the psychoanalytical function of perception, which is our freedom to interpret as we wish, when responsibilities redirect attention to controlling someone's personality rather than understanding problems or emotions. All objects appear to have a learning curve. All subjects appear to have a learning curve at study, and suggest information is not personally subjective. In the same way, psychoanalysis can be understood with the Oedipus complex, as suggested by Sigmund Freud, which provides an understanding of disorders, craziness, neuroses, and the necessary order and management in the form of a character created for theatre. This allows improvement to be the improvement being experienced, the understanding gained of a subject to be reinterpreted as a desire to develop a subject rather than a conscious expression of your ability to do so. So in this thing, you haven't actually developed it by experiencing an improvement in your understanding. It's merely a reflection of your desire to do something to help others gain an understanding or add content to the subject you are studying. So I could say the sexually frustrated may, that is, allow themselves to mistake psychoanalysis for science, this broad type of word science that we have. It's not really a subject in itself. So, consciousness is to psychoanalysis as mythology is to modern science. This compensates for the spatial metaphors used in understanding illness and management of a person, such as feeling low, looking up, being centered. The compensation creates a context for strongly held claims of lacking control. In regards to the psychoanalytical considerations of understanding present circumstances in terms of being a product of developing childhood behavior, developing from your childhood behavior. Interpretations of your history and ideas of family or community. So you've got the threefold. So to prefer your apparent environment more than your personal history, which may not be apparent, is to be hysterical. Here, the restrictions of the present environment have been personally exaggerated to impossible or unachievable opportunities. Your behavior compensates by emphasizing the importance of conflict, just conflict. An environment can be conceived psychoanalytically in the same way personal interpretations that cannot be related to the community limit behavior within a community. So that's the environment. Your interpretations of your community. Even to the extent that your behavior is limited in your community, that is your environment. The more hysterical people in the community, the more functional they will appear, further preventing an understanding of personal history. So concern with negativity in life is a symptom of avoiding your personal ideals. The understanding of happiness or what is happening is changed by thoughts about everyday life. Consequently, we imitate behaviors we remember in others as everyday things. The responsibility to choose who we like and dislike allows us to understand our intentions and emotions, and when others are indifferent or ignorant of this. The extent that another is characterized negatively or unnaturally depends on how much your relationship with them provides you with an understanding of your personal ideal. This negativity can be seen to prevent communication if thoughts about everyday life include periods of isolation from your environment, from your behavior in your community. So, describing conscious behaviors as being caused by other behaviors, or suggesting that your actions are meant to inform others' actions, or vice versa, is a symptom of behavior being influenced by past experiences which are interpreted as sexual. This allows behavior to be conceptualized in regards to the understanding of your own emotional responses to the environment, which are created as you act, compensating for expectations of reward or change. So, attributing consistency or universality to behavior creates sexual emotions. When improper behavior is misrepresented as difficult to repeat because it is improper or imitate, and sensible behavior is seen as what is easily remembered. Neutral or insignificant behaviors are seen as lacking emotions, when the other two are apparently true, or occurring without emotional affect. and are interpreted as personally impossible or as ideal behavior. For example, engineering or computing activity taken out of a context of just developing the community. You know, evil genius, whatever. Differences between internal and external reality prevent critical thought and emotional vulnerability, as the thinking process is exaggerated to become a product influenced by external impressions, which have superiority over any internal activity, or vice versa, subjecting people to an exclusively external universe. This prevents ideas of a universe from being developed through appreciation, just cultivating what you like, or allow a person to see themselves as practical in contrasting vastly differing circumstances, as ideas of superiority cannot always be applied, leaving them vulnerable to believing they're inferior and therefore suppressing emotions or influence in their reality. Reducing understanding to a feeling creates an association with something that can be conceptualized, interacted with, and consequently change the relationship with a chosen object or experience. This association compensates for the possibility that experience can provide to someone a lack of understanding, which will be seen as at least beneficial. Therefore, allowing a person to believe they have benefited from being able to express their lack of understanding must be followed by a positive feeling about their decision to give attention to or participate in the misunderstood experience. Force can be psychoanalytically conceived as a suggestion that provides the opportunity to develop their interpretations, personal interpretations of influence in a community in regard to the perception of their behavior or self-esteem. This recreates force. This recreates the force that you have or you see in a way that allows people to manipulate their understanding of humanity by asserting their opinion about an experience and its influence on others. The presumption that human qualities can be interpreted as restricted to one gender or demographic, as a group of people, facilitates the infantile, the childlike submissiveness of socialization. Like when we're growing up, we look into people, what do we do? To restrict a person's ability to create an understandable interpretation will degenerate personality, suggesting sexual perversion or corruption is occurring, in which attractive or influential behavior is associated with the responsibility to perform rather than the understanding of their humanity. The interest in performing compensates for the tendency to reject what's being communicated in order to be submissive, like an archetypal child, like a typical child, limiting your ability to gain an understanding. Rejecting the information you have. This is one from Leonardo da Vinci and his book, The Treatise on Painting. It's the only book I can find translated. Yeah. So, vision excludes genius, and similarly, infinity is inclusive of confusion. To associate desires with sense, or a lack of sense, suggests that the person misinterprets genius as limitless for some reason. It is not infinity, genius is limitless and senselessness as limited. This creates a confused perception of humanity to the extent that their beliefs are acted upon. So if they can act on these beliefs, they will confuse themselves personally about the humanity and the potential therein, the infiniteness of the potential of their humanity. This person's entire experience of life is mistaken for a process of interpreting and applying beliefs, where previously this process was the function of sense or intelligence. In this case, believing in genius excites and is equal to the perception of genius. I believe you're a genius, so you are a genius. This can be seen as occurring randomly as vision, sense, genius, or meaning has been excluded from the process of perceiving, which compensates for a lack of interest in what is sensed or known. The pursuit of knowledge can be mistaken, so this is no more, that's just one Leonardo da Vinci, back to Freud. The pursuit of knowledge can be mistaken for a form of competition, in the same way competitiveness can be interpreted as a natural inclination. Conflict can be psychoanalytically conceived to the extent that someone believes they can attain the same knowledge they perceive in another person. The idea that knowledge can be hidden creates the perception of personality being different in others, providing a desire to compete. Whether the competition takes priority and takes place is based on the amount of knowledge a person has about this circumstance of seeing a different personality. Psychoanalysis creates a context for competition that excludes knowledge on the basis of a lack of cooperation. This means conflicted parties are unable to rationally communicate. Competition requires a non-competitive situation prior to initiating conflict to deprive the involved parties of the knowledge of circumstances that will lead them into conflict. The perception of an attraction to ideals, ultimateness, infinite ideals, your ideal, is a representation of the unconscious actions that are performed to compensate for a fear of understanding the purpose or function of beliefs in a superior authority. Attraction functions to provide the understanding of the potential of ideals, in this case, which can be recognized in good and bad performances or interactions. Attraction to negative emotions can be psychoanalytically conceived in the same way that obedience to authority provides suffering. So you get when following a perceived order. You think your authority is telling you to do this, but you're suffering. Similarly, concern for whether a performance is judged as good or bad by an authority, concern for this, limits your responsibility to understand the function of authorities and their services. To perceive an alteration in behaviour in yourself or another is a symptom of an understanding of pleasure that excludes subordination or rebellion, rather than having enjoyment be the context to which disobedience or non-conformity can safely occur without influencing personality. Like, it's all good, we're all happy, you're enjoying it, it's enjoyment. The context that psychoanalysis provides for changes in the perception of behaviours involves a consideration of personal achievements or self-esteem. This suggests the perception of change is a representation of a decrease or increase in the frequency of achievements with measurable, understandable results. Whether or not the behavior change is positive or negative is not due to the frequency of achievements increase or decrease respectively. So increase isn't positive, decrease isn't negative. Rather, the increase in unfamiliar results produces a negative affect, emotions, to the extent that the increase is perceived to be due to another's behaviour. So it's not you being unfamiliar, it's someone else being unfamiliar. It's like, what? How is someone? What? Therefore, every other unfamiliar result is perceived positively, regardless where it comes from. If it's not coming from someone else, I don't give a fuck if it's unfamiliar. The idea that some experiences or parts of your reality are outside of your control or can occur without your knowledge and approval is produced from experience of positive reinforcement for rejecting your ideals. The potential for someone to be attracted to or afraid of experiences where they lack control or knowledge suggests that this person's conscience has been misjudged as having the ability and the concern to reject ideals rather than being a conscious expression of your ideals. Fear is psychoanalytically conceived in regards to creating a context for associations between self-inflicted positive reinforcement, e.g. positive thinking, go on, do it, yeah, and the perception that one person can aid another in improving their behaviour. So, can I really help this person, no matter how much I support myself in doing so? To assume behaviour is influenced by fearful emotions compensates for a lack of understanding in when your ideals actualize and assert themselves in your experience. The expression of your ideal behavior can be misrepresented as occurring due to fearful emotions rather than the entire emotional spectrum, allowing you to express yourself in a situation. Feelings represent desirable experiences. To the extent that communication is interpreted as a means of achieving a goal, whatever it may be, the presumption that a goal is dependent on the results of communication is a symptom of attachment to the experience of restricting someone's ability to perceive what was being communicated by you, by them, by anyone, or that their interpretation of a communication, maybe it's not happening, it's previous, or some information is significant. Restrictiveness, it's a symptom of that. Experience that suggests people can or need to change the interpretation of their personal experience creates the idea that communicating personal feelings leads to dependency. This dependency results in misinterpreting feelings, as if they promote the likelihood of communication. Rather, a person's desire becomes subordinate, it serves, to goals that provide a dependency wherever there was no dependency prior, in order to form new goals. This is the intention of rejecting others' interpretations, restricting it for them, wanting to do that. That's your goal. Similarly, negative emotional affect, for example, censorship, yourself, stop, censor you, is perceived as a good feeling when dependency becomes unconscious. You can no longer interpret what you are dependent on. During the process of communication, so you communicate something that censors someone, and it feels good. You just didn't know you were dependent on them. The belief that unconscious behaviors or thoughts are not shared between people when they're communicating consciously, it's unconscious kind, suggests that the relationship between these people is being influenced by a motivation to limit emotional affect, or alternative perceptions of opinions that are shared in common. Well, you share this in common, where does it come from? This motivation to make some emotions unconscious, no interpretation, is a representation of a desire to define an inability to express ideals as the origin of familiar perceptions, rather than maintaining a conscious motivation to create the desire to express ideals. So you want to express what is ideal for yourself. You don't think your inability to do so is why you do what you do. Continuing on, the familiarity of an inability to express ideals is unconscious to the extent that a person's intention to influence, provide some of their personal influence, have it be a part of the community, what is theirs, provides a shared understanding between people to create goals. The attachment to conversations between people provides the means to create an understanding of those involved. A perceived lack of understanding towards information is a representation of a desire to change your perceived interpretation. Ideals cannot change or be expressed whilst people are under the influence of the presumption that additional interpretations are in opposition or will change their experience of some shared information or a mutual understanding. Familiarity is conceived through psychoanalysis as a context for allowing someone to search or learn more about past interpretations that are decreasing in priority or meaning. It's no longer important. Where anticipation of an experience is mistaken for a desire to interact or provide support. This mistake prevents ideas from losing meaning and compensates for unconscious desires to limit understanding of conscious behavior, your conscious behavior, or self-esteem, which arise, limited understanding, when familiar interpretations lose their effectiveness. To expect an experience to be familiar is a symptom of unsatisfied self-esteem, which is presumed to be associated with a present interaction which cannot be understood. The expectation represents the desire to develop new interpretations. To assume a person's mindset, health, or esteem is influenced by a present environment suggests that an intention of making unconscious behaviors conscious is being communicated. This could be seen as therapy, something they do in therapy. The pursuit for good health and esteem has been mistaken for the ability or responsibility of your ideals to determine what unconscious behaviors, something you can't explain, can sustain conscious motivations, what you can explain. A desire to create value judgments of ideas or comparing effectiveness of ideas is a symptom of attachment to interpretations that are decreasing in priority. Meaning, this decrease is reinterpreted as an increase. That's the switch around. When a person manages to associate their ideals with the negative emotional affect they perceive when controlling conscious behaviors. So this is tough to manage. I must sacrifice something. It's a sacrifice what I'm doing. Identifying exclusively with negative emotions occurs to compensate for personal reasons why ideals are rejected, and promotes desires to understand how someone defines judgments which, when they're being contradicted by a decrease in priority, cannot be ideal behavior, cannot be your ideals, behaving, acting, assertive, because they're decreasing in priority. An improvement in conscious behavior is associated with expressing ideal behavior, as psychoanalysis creates a context where intentions to fulfill desires are a representation of your ability to provide support to already established motivations. Pretty sure you can do them. These motivations can be unconscious to the extent that desires are recognized as being unable to be influenced by others' behavior. People are motivated to alter others' desires when conscious behaviors are mistaken as having the ability to change their unconscious behavior. No. I mean, you know what it is. You can't change what you don't know. What you know, no. Or limit the influence of someone's ideal, because just because you know what you're doing doesn't mean you can stop someone from having it the best way for them. To perceive an interpretation as being similar or shared between two or more people suggests that the understanding of this interpretation is functioning to increase attention, awareness towards those involved, these two people. A common application of interpreting experience is to influence the experience itself. However, in regards to the desirable emotions of an experience, what do you want to get? Interpretation only occurs to create varying intensities or meanings of an impression of an experience, to function as your memory of the experience, where subsequent behavior expresses and increases, or cannot express and decreases this variation. The memory cannot express, so your memory is getting, which compensates for the desire to have the understanding provided by the experience communicated by someone else's behavior or lack thereof. To expect interpretations of unconscious behavior to result from a desired experience is a symptom of attachment to understandings or effects of negative emotions. Rejecting people's ideals, your ideal, anyone's ideals is mistaken for unconscious behavior when, because you know what it is that you're rejecting. Obviously you're rejecting when people expect their desires to improve conscious behavior. This is the desire, just have fun. The understanding of unconscious behavior functions to improve emotional affect, your influence, emotional understanding, influence, in order to identify with desires that reduce resistance to ideal behavior. This can be interpreted as developing in knowledge or skill when ideal behavior is expressed. Attempts to prevent communication of the nature of your ideal behavior is a representation of interpretations that attribute greater effect from the interpretation itself on your conscious behavior than your ideal. So just because you understand what may be ideal, what the nature of your ideal is, doesn't mean your interpretation is in any way ideal. This is similar to desires to communicate biochemical, environmental or psychological problems to those who have provided you with a reason to want to receive your problems of this nature, the psychological and sexual nature, especially when the reason is related to your relationship with them. Personal problems can be conceived psychoanalytically as providing a context for misunderstanding someone's conscious behavior as being associated with the desires of a group of people. It's them doing, it's no group. This expectation that your conscious behavior can be interpreted as like others' behaviors, as others' behavior, represents a reaction to the denial of ideals, which creates for others an understanding of their reactions that reinforce definitions of ideal behavior that give people the desire to dissociate or distinguish their conscious behavior from their ideals. So everything they understand cannot be ideal. Such as suggesting there are differences in pleasure between conscious and unconscious behavior, which is, you don't understand unconscious, so what is this? To presume someone has little or no understanding of what is in their best interest or what is the highest priority or meaning for them is representing the responsibility of ideals to create unconscious behaviors to compensate for conscious expressions of lacking understanding in a situation with overwhelming or irrational emotions. which they aren't. If they have a function, so what? The necessity or impulse of expressing a lack of understanding can be conceived psychoanalytically as the production of unconscious trust or faith in the context where the expression is produced or required. The extent that the perception of lacking understanding remains outside of the misunderstood context, like you're still saying you don't know, but you know it, but you understand everything around you. So, yeah. For example, when no more information can be gained, you've accepted, they've stopped talking about this misunderstood subject, is dependent on conscious motivation to communicate how the expression was effective at influencing ideals. This conscious motivation may be mistaken for unconscious behavior and therefore maintain a sense of lacking understanding when this person is reacting negatively to rejecting ideals. Like, oh no, I accept you, really, I don't think you're stupid or something. What is understood as negative or undesirable, a undesirable motivation, cannot be changed as the reality of this situation, of the negative motivation, provides you with means to fulfill unconscious desires that allow ideal behaviors to be expressed in a new context, expanding your ideal. Let me just... the assumption that the conscious behavior of someone can be interpreted as ideal or completely satisfying, just their conscious behavior, so you can understand about them, is a symptom of desires that are expected to provide an interpretation of unconscious behavior. Like, oh, you just fulfill me amazingly. That's why I like your conscious behavior. Whoa. For example, a desire to improve the relationship with another whilst avoiding interaction. That's consciously interacting. Here, desire provides means for someone to believe that another is the cause of their behavior, and through preventing communication, they are unconsciously expressing that they are unable to maintain self-awareness and dignity consistently in this relationship when they're relating, interacting. Consciously intending to avoid or ignore responsibility or relationships represents desires that are decreasing in importance, meaning priority, caused by the affect of an unconscious desire forming with a higher priority or meaning. I'm just not sure, but I know there's something better. Unconscious desire. This identification with meaninglessness or meaningless circumstance is understood psychoanalytically as compensating for the unconscious activity that provides the means for an interpretation to be made conscious. So I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I might just do something through redefining a familiar experience, for example, or when reconsidering the influence of past interactions. To believe interpretations can be identified with suggests that there's a desire to create a distinction between the origins of conscious behavior and the understanding of a community. That is suggesting your consciousness is nothing to do with the community. Identification is conceived psychoanalytically as the conscious expression of successfully managing to establish a moral or desirable situation. Personal, in your opinion. The understanding of a community becomes distinct from the ability to establish morals when others are perceived to be able to influence a community based on their own management of morals or desires. Similarly, the originality of a person's behavior is desirable to the extent that interpretations do not create distinctions within a community. To believe unconscious behavior is more influential on personality than ideals suggests a desire to prevent some people from being a part of your community, or to stop communities from interacting, whether or not you're a part of that community interacting. You have the influence to do that. And you're suggesting that there is something that they do not understand. You're imposing this, that you're making more of their behavior unconscious. So they continue the lack of interaction, the lack of conscious interacting. Influence is psychoanalytically conceived as the amount activities can be performed without concern for its purpose. Rather, there's a preoccupation with the appearance in consciousness, how you are consciously interpreting how does this really look, because you have all the influence. You can make it look however you want it to, and you can see it, interpret it that way as well. Appearances are seen as meaningless to the extent that your community, or your understanding of, supports personal ideals. Ideal behavior can appear to be unconscious to compensate for misunderstanding the function or purpose of your community. This allows the community to support someone's influence, propagate it, allow others to interpret it in a communal way, regardless of their intention to participate in desirable activities. That's the understanding is misrepresented as requiring an interpretation. I just understand. Yeah, I understand. I don't have to explain it to you. I understand. You just know. When there's an attachment to ideas about the purpose of pain or unpleasure, such as the reward they provide when endured. This allows attention to be dulled or redirected to unrelated circumstance, to reduce the interest in dissatisfying experience, pain or pleasure, increasing the sense of purpose in more pleasurable experiences which can be interpreted. The desire to express negative emotions is a symptom of being in the process of developing interpretations of ideal behavior, where fulfilling the desire to express the negative emotion prevents interpretation and creates unconscious motivation. Negativity can be psychoanalytically conceived as the context which supports self-esteem by suggesting to your community that your actions are informative or powerful. The extent that others do not characterize you as negative is a representation of the understanding that your actions provide for their ideals within the community. Negativity can be misrepresented as ideal behavior when the community, everyone, lacks confidence in their performance. For example, in terms of survival, this compensates for the potential within people to form influential interpretations of the community, which express their ideals within the community and prevent them from perceiving the community negatively. The desire to suggest appearances are the cause of conscious behavior. Appearances, oh, I see. Do you understand? Is a representation of interpreting other people's ideals as more influential in your community than your own ideal behavior. An understanding of a person's influence is rejected in the same way that someone can determine that an environment is not supportive of their ideals. So they're still influencing. Let's ignore that part of my environment. Someone's influence supports another when they consciously desire similar developments within a community. So maybe they don't influence in the same way. Unconscious behavior limits influence of those who are unsupportive within a community to establish means to share resources. So I'm not sure why we're here, but we will treat each other in regards to health. We will not let each other wither away completely, such as nutrition or knowledge, regardless of ideals, to compensate for people's intentions to form a new separate community, or exclusivity within the community. It's a new community. To suggest feelings provide ideas of ownership or possession is a symptom of lacking understanding towards what is being communicated by authorities. They own you. They possess what you possess. You as an individual. Similarly, interpretations of desires without an understanding of their influence on personality represent intentions to reduce dependency upon authorities. So I'm not sure how this is going to affect me, but your authorities definitely know how this is going to affect you. But you do not want to know this, as you are dependent on them, and you do not want to know this either. The inability to refuse, the inability or refusal of someone to obey authorities can be psychoanalytically conceived as the fulfillment of opportunities in a community which provide for authorities their influence on the people in terms of their ability to support the community through exercising their authority. So the inability or refusal of someone to obey authority can be psychoanalytically conceived as the fulfillment of the opportunities a community provides for authorities to influence people in terms of their ability to support their community through exercising their authority, to give them means to express their desires, to develop their personality. This can be anyone, even your authorities. The extent that authorities do not desire to develop humanity or personality within their community depends on the understanding of property within a community, where interpretations of entitlement or leverage due to owning property limit understanding of the influence of personality, like each individual. What can a person do? I don't care about your property. What can you do? I don't care what you have. I care about who you are. That's influential. This compensates for some people obtaining additional resources, which, if the understanding of property remains limited for them, for those who are hoarding resources, will be misused and poorly utilized. Providing people with less property means to understand how their conscious behavior can degenerate their ideals through unconscious obedience to authority. So they just want to serve. They don't see what's going on. They can't influence anyone anymore. They're proper tired from it. To suggest past experience is the cause of personal misunderstandings between yourself. It represents a desire to get people to consciously agree to your ideals. The idea that conscious agreement is necessary to express ideal behavior compensates for tendencies to behave unconsciously when ideal opportunities are presented to you. Oh, this is not ideal. No one is agreeing with me. Man, you could have figured out what you really wanted or whatever. Opportunity can be conceived through psychoanalysis by regarding the thoughts about an experience, potential, hypothetical or otherwise, as representing the process of conscious behavior becoming unconscious, which represents ideals being applied consciously. Yes, it's done. I don't care. I don't have to interpret it anymore. You know? The extent that an experience is not seen as ideal is due to thoughts being misrepresented as unconscious behavior, rather than assertions of conscious actions. That's what thought is. That is, thoughts do not arise from the unconscious, some unconscious field or awareness. Rather, they are expressed as you are aligning with your ideals. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Go.